Okay, well, again, thank you so much for joining us for this very important and timely discussion about teens, tech, and their online relationships. My name is Stephen Balcom, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Family Online Safety Institute. FOSI is an international nonprofit organization whose mission is to make the online world safer for kids and their families. And we convene leaders in industry, government, and the nonprofit sectors to collaborate and innovate in this field of online safety. So last week, we celebrated Safer Internet Day, and all this month, we are marking Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And so with the support of Aura, one of our members, who is a provider of intelligent safety solutions, we've put together this outstanding panel of experts to discuss how to empower young people to better protect themselves while using tech within their online relationships. In our own recent research, we found that Generation Z showed widespread enthusiasm for the connected life that most of us, of course, are in, with 89% reporting that they like using social media and 87% excited about the impact technology will have on their future. The picture is mixed, however, when it comes to safety. Most Gen Z users find managing their online safety to be overwhelming, and 60% of parents feel they can't keep up with the changes happening online. And then we asked this question, not surprisingly, 3 out of 5 Gen Z respondents say they teach their parents more than they teach them about online safety.
I bet that's true.
And while many young people have unfavorable views about parental controls, a majority are enthusiastic about online safety tools that are in-app and designed to be used by teens and young people to remain safe, secure, and private. So we're going to explore these and many similar themes in a moment. First, just a quick note that we are recording this discussion, and we will post the video up on our YouTube channel in the coming days. And we'll send out a note to let everyone know when it's up. Also, if you have comments or questions, please use the Q&A button on the right-hand side of your screen, and I will try and get to as many of your questions as possible. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our panelists to tell us a little bit about themselves. And let's start with Erica.
Hi, thank you so much, Stephen, and hello, everyone. My name is Erica Olsen. I am the director of the Safety Net Project at the National Network to End Domestic Violence. The Safety Net Project was founded almost 21 years ago, and we look at the intersection of technology and safety as it intersects with domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and teen dating violence. We primarily provide trainings and resources to those who are working with survivors of abuse to increase their capacity to respond to the concerns that people have, whether are being victimized by somebody who is misusing a technology, or if they are interested in increasing their privacy and safety online.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. David Greenfield. I'm the founder and medical director of the Center for Internet and Technology Addiction. And basically, we do research, publication, and treatment of issues related to internet. We were a pretty early player in the field of internet addiction and internet overuse, and started this in about the mid-1990s. We published a few books and a few studies on the area of overuse of the internet. And now I have an interest in trying to not only work with people who are clearly addicted to the internet, but to sort of help all of us use the internet a little bit more moderately and obviously safely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for being here. Rita, would you like to say hi?
Thanks, Stephen. I am had started working in domestic violence and sexual assault work in 1981. So Stephen, I kind of feel like an old cat. I've been doing this a long time, but I I've worked in shelters. I was director of programs. I spent over 20 years as the director of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I am now one of the senior advisors to the National Football League on their domestic violence and sexual assault work. And I am the vice president of external relations for domesticshelters.org. And we partner with Aura on some things with them. And so really looking forward to having this conversation and looking forward to giving people ideas about how, if they have young people they're concerned about, they can respond to them, and ideas that they can share with them about more safe interactions, because the web can be vicious if people don't know how to manage the pushback that abusers use this way. So thank you for doing this.
Well, thanks so much for being here and for your incredibly important work. Ryan, why don't you check in?
Thanks, Stephen, and really honored to be here with everyone on the panel. I'm the CTO at Aura. We're an intelligent safety company, as Stephen explained very eloquently, focused on protecting people, making them more safe online. And one of our huge focuses this year is actually bringing parental controls to a broader audience and making them simpler and easier to use, so they're more able to protect families with children of all ages, and even extending into adults, as David talked a bit about addiction and how that can impact not just children, teens, but also all of us. Really excited to have the conversation today.
Great. And really interesting mix of backgrounds that you all are coming from. Erica, let me begin with you. So as teens mature, they start using online spaces to explore their identity, their communities and relationships. What would you say is the best way to balance their need for independence and privacy with the need to convey important lessons about risk and safety?
That's a great question. I think we're still developing a lot of norms around how we behave online, and I don't think we have it all figured out just yet. We kind of entered into this space, and some of us remember when some of the major platforms that we use all the time were first born and created. Others were growing up in this space, and so the norms can be very different for different generations, and our use and understanding of technology. And so I think it can be hard to communicate and share the expectations, the responsibilities that we have to each other, whether that's to strangers online, to people we're dating, or our family members, things like that, because we often generationally do have different expectations around privacy, around what we share online. So that's I think that's important for us to recognize, that not everybody has the same level of privacy needs. Not everybody has the same concerns about being online or being visible online. And so I think starting to talk to teens, and is a big part of that is kind of meeting them where they are, to talk about what their needs are, their concerns, and then really think about the norms that they want to help establish in this world about being respectful online. A big piece of this for us is talking about consent. We think that consent, both offline and online, is a really important factor of both being able to establish privacy and safety. And people have to navigate that boundary of, how do I show that I trust somebody? How do I show that I care for somebody, but also make clear that I deserve my own privacy. Just because I care about you doesn't mean you need to have access to my accounts, or have my password. And navigating that boundary is I think delicate and requires a lot of thoughtful conversations.
Yeah, it reminds me when our daughter was younger and at high school, not so much with boyfriends, but with her girlfriends, passwords were almost a currency of friendship.
Yeah.
And, when we were trying to clamp down on her use, she would share her password with her best friend, who would then tweet and do other things on her behalf as if it was her, which obviously stunned us when we discovered that one. So anyone else want to weigh in on this particular question?
I think Erica did a tremendous job outlining the needs to sort of communicate. And one of the big challenges is, as you think about the generational gaps, many of us probably here are petrified, mortified of the amount of information that's available about us online. And we go to no end to sort of restrict the sharing of that. Children who've grown up, teenagers who've grown up doing nothing but sharing themselves online don't have those same fears. And so helping through those communications, those conversations, to educate teens to not to scare them, but simply to the risks of having that much information available, and just that educational process of what is maybe a little bit too much, what exposure could open up unintended sort of consequences, I think are like really important conversations to have. But Erica's like first sentence was spot on, which is these are conversations we have to have.
Yeah, I wanted to bring you in, Rita, particularly on this question about establishing trust and communication that gives kids the space or encourages them to bring up difficult topics and have a bad situation that escalates in secrecy. How would you approach this?
Well, I was thinking about that, Stephen, as I was wondering what we should highlight here. And I think for parents or family members who are concerned about a particular group or teens that they have, or even young people, one thing might be important to, as you mentioned, knowing who their best friends are, knowing where the vulnerable places are, and developing some sense of a relationship with them. I'm not overbearing as, kind of a hovering parent, but just getting to know that kid a little bit, so that if you have concerns about your teen, they're most likely not going to tell you first. If they're in trouble, they're going to tell their friends. And so developing a relationship where you could actually feel comfortable saying, do you think Sally's okay? I've just had some concerns about her, and I just wondered, you spend a lot of time with her. Do you think there's anything going on that maybe we should talk about? Just to kind of reach out to them, because if they have that kind of personal data, like passwords, and they're going to know everything, every thought that that teen is sharing, and they're not sharing it with adults. Most of the research seems to indicate that teens who are abused generally are not talking to adults about it, they're talking to teens. And so we need to make ourselves available and approachable to those other people in our kids' lives, so that we can be seen as a resource when something really bad happens.
Brilliant. Okay, David, I want to shift the conversation to you a little bit here. There's the term tech addiction, there's the term overuse, there's, I believe Michael Rich talks about problematic interactive media use.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways of saying too much.
Emu.
So what are the what do we say are the benefits of disconnecting, particularly when there's some kind of conflict, like a breakup? And how does screen time impact a situation, either escalating it or de-escalating it?
Well, when it comes to the internet, obviously the internet is very useful and integrated into our lives. But when it does come to the internet, it's sort of the old adage, too much of a good thing is not a good thing. The idea is to really create a moderated use or a more mindful use of technology, because the internet is so intrusive and integrated into our lives now. If we don't set limits on the technology and we don't manage that technology will manage us, and not just in terms of safety, but in terms of just eating our time and our lives. If you just spend 3 hours a day online and you sleep 8 hours and you start as a kid and live into your 80s, That's 10 years of your waking life that you're going to be spending on that screen. And that's at 3 hours a day. The average use among teenagers and young adults is about 7.5 hours a day. So some of it is about educating people about how much time they're spending, and the fact that when we're online, we all dissociate, we all distort time. We aren't aware of the passage of that time. And the other thing is, in spite of the fact that we all know the internet is far from anonymous, there's still a perception, believe it or not, that the internet is an anonymous form of communication, even though we have lots of evidence to show to the contrary. There's this sense that when you go online, you're going into this safe space, when in fact, it's probably the least anonymous form of communication we have. So some of it is educating people as to really what's going on the internet. And then lastly, we have data that show that about 50% of people admit to lying when they're online. You know, LOL shouldn't stand for laugh out loud. It should stand for lie online. And this idea that, you know, everything you read online is somehow true, when in fact, about half the time it's not. So, you know, some of it is just educating people as to the real metrics about how the nuts and bolts of the internet work, not whether it's good or bad or should be used or shouldn't be used. It's obviously here to stay.
All right. Well, thank you for that clarification, of course, and we'll get to a question later about the metaverse, but and God help us when we get there. But let's for the time being assume we're here in 2022. It's hard to keep up with everything that's going on. This is just an open question for you all. How can parents detect or sense if a teen is in an unhealthy or controlling relationship if it's taking place entirely online? Are there warning signs to look for?
Well,
Go ahead, Erica.
That's what I was going to say the same to you, Rita, if you wanted to start on that. But, you know, I think I don't think they're that different than some of the signs that parents have been told to look out for in case their kid might be experiencing depression or any type of trauma. If they experience abuse, even in a school or at a sports team or anything like that, teens can sometimes become very withdrawn, very secretive. You know, and if it has to do with something that is happening within their devices, right? Online has to do with something that's happening on their phone, they might become really secretive over that device and over those accounts. They might not want you to see it at all and feel a sense of urgency around somebody else noticing that. I think another thing could be sometimes it's always about the context, so it's a little bit hard because you know, so what might appear as somebody in distress may not be, but I think sometimes it could also be when somebody feels a sense of stress if they are not responsive. So if the phone dings, they got a text message, they have a missed call, they have a messenger waiting for them, and they feel this sense of that they seem to feel a sense of stress over needing to be responsive. That I think can be often if people aren't excited to respond but stressed about needing to respond, otherwise they could be in trouble. That is often a sign that the person that they're talking to is being abusive.
Rita, you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a key part of it is how possessive are they being of that device? Like if it gets out of their sight or out of their hands for even a second, there's a reason why they're like, I've got to find it. Where's my phone? Where's my phone? Where's my phone? Because they're worried about the fact that they haven't gotten back immediately to the person that's trying to control them in that process. And so I think that's a pretty clear sign. I think if a parent or someone close to that teen is worried about it, there's some resources that they can direct them to for them to try to figure out. We do a lot of articles on domesticshelters.org, really original content. And one of them is, am I being abused? So that you can just kind of give people, you send them a link and say, you know, here's some information. I wonder if you have any friends who might be experiencing this, and then they can read it and see if they kind of fall into that format. So it's not identifying for them, you think they're in trouble because they might resist that, but just, you know, I've heard a lot about this, and I wonder if you have friends that you might want to think about taking care of, and then they've got the information themselves to kind of review what's happening for them. So really important for us to try to figure out ways to engage with those teens in a way that keeps them talking to us and not withdraw more.
Yep. Great.
One of the interesting things is folks will come to us looking for technological solutions, and what both Erica and Rita just said illustrates why there isn't a technological answer to this. You can do things like monitor social media accounts. You can use tools that will actually actively push you notifications when your teens are using language or sending information that you might think is inappropriate. But at the end of the day, the only way to do that is having a conversation with your teen to have their login and their password so you can share that information. And if you haven't had that conversation and you're doing it surreptitiously, when they change their password, as they inevitably will, because that's a routine they get into because they know parents monitor, then you're in this stuck position of, do I tell them I know they changed their password and then I was spying on them? So if you aren't having those open conversations, the technological solutions can never come in to help. So you've got to be out front having the conversations so that you're able to intercede when you do notice something's coming along. There's just no technological answer coming here that's going to solve the actual communication problem.
Interesting. David, it looked like you had a point.
Well, just that you have to remember that part of what's going on in a teenager's life is that they are separating and individuating and trying to create a sense of identity that's private and separate and distinct from their parents. So this is sort of the internet is sort of a perfect storm for allowing that, but also because of that secrecy, it can be problematic. I agree with the panel, really, there's no substitute for watching your kid. And I don't mean watching their kid literally, but really being aware of their moods and their changes and their patterns of behavior. And if something looks off, if you feel like something looks off, it probably is off. And then talking to your kid about it. You can't really substitute for that talking to your child thing. And they'll let you know one way or the other that there may be something going on. I also like the idea of having some knowledge of a friend that you can rely on if something really goes south. There are numbers of cases where we've gotten calls because a friend was told that the person was talking about suicide on their device, and then the friend called the parents because they were worried about the person. So I think that's really critical.
Great. Actually, Ryan, I want to come back to you though. I think your view that the most important, and I often say the best parental control is talking with your kids. On the other hand, you're in the business of creating parental controls and online safety tools. And I'm curious to know what you think the current state of play is and how it's going to continue to evolve. And also, do you see that distinction I made at the beginning between parental controls on the one hand and online safety tools on the other?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one I think I think we struggle with because everybody, you look at the advancement of technology and how much our lives arguably have been improved by how much faster and easier things become, but so many of the capabilities of parental controls come down to brute force. I don't want my children to go to this site. I don't want my children to interact with that thing. And those are all like blanket restrictions without nuance, without granularity. And so when you're dealing with things that are that black and white, you have to have the communications up front that, hey, when you navigate to this type of site, you're going to be restricted. Here's why. You have the conversation. Otherwise, all you're doing is gatekeeping and encouraging like when I was a kid starting to play with computers and getting to something that I couldn't get into. Oh, well, why is that on the top shelf? Why is that something I can't go to? You're just making them more attractive. So there is a nuance there. One of the things we're trying to solve for is less about better controls and more about making it easier for both the teens, children, and the adults, the parents involved, to make the right decisions. This is an overwhelming, incredibly complex space. What should I block? What should I restrict? What are the right things to do? We can make that significantly easier. And Stephen, as you sort of talked about the in-app versus sort of broader network controls, it's great. It is tremendous that platforms like Instagram and Twitter have come and recognized the potential risk they're putting on teens and made it, or quite frankly, anyone, and made it possible to do some in-app privacy controls. I'm not sure if you've ever tried to go in and actually set those settings. It's not incredibly simplistic, nor really understandable to a sort of I'll even say a reasonably technical person. That's another place where I think, both from a technology perspective, we're trying to optimize those and saying, hey, don't worry about this. You want to be only with your friends? Let us go set the settings for you across Instagram, across Twitter, across YouTube, to make sure that what you're sharing is only with your friends. And pushing those same controls to parents so they can understand the right level of settings to set. Because for folks who haven't grown up in this world, diving into Facebook's privacy controls and trying to figure out which button keeps this from getting shared to everyone versus which one only goes to my family, it's impossible. And over time, our hope is that with some encouragement and nudging, we can either allow these big platforms to open up their controls to allow various tools to make it easy to set them, or the sort of groundswell of folks coming in saying this is just too much will eventually get them to make it much easier, much simpler for folks to be able to interact with those tools.
Yeah, Erica?
I'd love to jump in and piggyback on that too. Ryan, I can't agree more with what you were saying. I couldn't about the importance of thinking through parental controls and how to use them. We see all the time people who are interested in using stealthy products that are out there that are meant to monitor what somebody else is doing without their knowledge, without their consent. Those are the same products that we see abusive adults misusing against other adults. And so when we see scenarios where parents are saying, but this could be a helpful tool for me to use to watch what my kid's doing online, we try to encourage thinking that through a little bit and considering all the potential damage that can do. Like you said, it's only going to be a matter of time before they figure it out. They're going to change their password. You're not going to know it. If you're using some sort of like stealthy program that will show you the new password, that will teach you all of that, that is incredibly invasive technology that takes away the person's privacy and autonomy completely. And the biggest problem with that is that we can't, as adults, and especially as parents, we can't end up saying the same thing that an abusive partner will say. Because what an abusive, even a teen, a boyfriend, girlfriend, even a teen will say very similar things like, I just care about you. I'm worried about you. I feel responsible. I just want to take care of you. I want to be there for you in case something happens. Those are some of the same things that we would say as parents, but the abusive person is going to say it too. And what happens is that teens then feel really confused about who has the ability to invade their privacy and who should not. And so when you have the conversation about trying to create boundaries, guidelines, I think it's a very different thing to say, I pay for this bill, so I get to look at this every once in a while, than to like get caught by your teen monitoring them without their consent and knowledge and have to explain yourself out of that. And then also simultaneously say, it's not okay for that person to demand your password. It's not okay for that person to insist on being in your accounts and to look at your phone, which we want to be able to say when that person is a partner, a friend who's being abusive. So if we want teens to truly be able to understand that and feel like they can create that boundary with anybody, then we have to allow them to create it with us. These are conversations I'm starting to have with, mine's only 7, but I have conversations now as she comes home and she'll say, something happened and I'm not sure I want to tell you. And I'll say, well, did it upset you? Were you scared? Were you sad? And she'll say no. And I'll say, okay, then, you let me know when you want to know. So we try to put those, those tidbits in her head about what signifies something I should share with somebody else and what doesn't, what could be mine to keep and what's important to share. And I just think those are incredibly important conversations to have in the beginning, because if we're only looking at technology tools because we're concerned our teen or somebody in our life is being abused, we're just intervening. We're not looking at primary prevention. And there's definitely a big difference there.
Boy, you make such an important point, Erica, about creating at the very beginning with your kids when you are instituting rules and instituting technologies to hopefully keep them safe and secure and private, that you're doing that in an open, conversationally way. Mm-hmm. We came across in some of our previous research, we came across a father, for instance, in Baltimore with a 17-year-old son who had cloned his son's phone so that every keystroke came to him, but he did it in stealth mode. And our question to the dad was, well, what happens if you do see something you need to confront him with?
Right.
Your son's going to say, how the hell did you know that?
Yeah.
Well, I've been spying on you since you were 9. And there goes all trust.
Yeah. I just want to support what Erica was just saying. It is really important to start having these conversations about, cyber civics really around kindergarten age, 6, 7, 8 years old. By the time a child is 8 years old, they're already inculcated into the internet world. So really 6 or 7, you really need to start having these conversations about the internet and how to use the internet and what it is and what it isn't. And that's new. We used to think kids wouldn't be accessing it until they're 12 or 13. But I'm telling you, we're seeing problems with kids getting into trouble online at age 12 or 13. So the conversations really need to happen really 5 or 6 years old, at least beginning to.
Yeah. I want to take this opportunity just to say, by the way, if you have questions or comments, please put it in the Q&A. One of our participants has raised her hand, Megan Dubovsky. Given that we're not bringing people on screen, if you wouldn't mind putting your question or comment in the Q&A, I will get to it straight away. And please let us know, anyone else, if you've got questions for this outstanding panel. One question, this came up in our research, and I keep referring to some research I think has been put in the chat from last year, when we were looking at young people's attitudes and use of online safety tools. 78% of them responded that they didn't think that the companies did enough to punish those who were abusing their platforms. So this then creates a sense of, well, what's the point in reporting? And I'm just wondering if any of you have come across this, the impact that has with trying to handle bullying or stalking or doxing or any other of the problematic behaviors that happen, particularly in teen dating, that the kids just don't feel like if they report it, it's going to go anywhere. Anybody have that experience or come across that as an issue?
Well, I think that's an accurate assessment of these platforms. Some of them are a little better than others, but the reality is that they don't do a good job. And I know that Erica and her organization have spent a long time trying to educate those platforms about how these things can be utilized and how they can actually lead to very serious harm or even homicide sometimes. And whether it's Facebook post or it's Twitter or it's Instagram or TikTok, you can location apps that are turned on, people finding their victim after they've left. It's really they listen, but it doesn't feel to me like they're responding at the level that we know is potentially there. And that for me is what's important. It's not just that I'm being trolled and somebody's being mean to me. It's that this person, if they are not responded to the way they want to be responded to, can escalate their violence and actually harm someone else. And there's got to be a way and I absolutely trust the person who's being abused online to feel that level of danger and to understand when they want help. And when they reach out, we have to be there to respond in an appropriate manner and to do as much as we can to block that other person. And we're never going to be 100%. It's kind of like suggesting victims get a restraining order. Yes, it's just a piece of paper, but it's a piece of paper that if we implement, and respond to it appropriately, it actually does reduce some abusers. But if we ignore it and just pretend it's a piece of paper within the court systems, then no, it's not going to make a difference. So don't tell people to report if you're not going to have an actually robust system of responding when somebody's really in danger.
Yeah.
And there's also bullying, not just physical danger, but the online platform, as we all know, is perfectly suited for cyberbullying. And we know that there are catastrophic consequences in some cases for those kids that are bullied online, and nobody knows that they're being bullied. And then we find out after the fact, sometimes, unfortunately, after something really bad happens.
Right.
So it's a perfect platform for that sort of secret kind of stealthy harassment.
Got it.
I'll add too that I think, this is what mirrors our real life scenarios and concerns and minimization that happens offline as well. And so I think, that there needs to be a step up of how we respond when people say something's happening or they're concerned about somebody's behavior. We need to take it more seriously everywhere, online and offline. I think that, we see a lot of complaints, not just about online platforms, but about schools and parents, law enforcement, service providers, everyone, where people feel like when they are saying, this is what's happening, that somebody else is saying, well, just block the person, to just minimize it, that there's this one technological solution that's going to make this person go away. And that's usually not the case. Even if you try to block the person, even if you try to mute them or whatever the setting is on that platform, they will usually just like create another account, find you offline. The escalation happens almost consistently in stalking, abuse, bullying cases. That escalation when somebody is trying to seek help or separate from that abusive person is so common, but it's minimized everywhere. And I think people have to really be respectful and say, like, if this is, we got to trust people's instincts and teens' instincts when they say this doesn't feel safe. They need everybody around them, the platforms and others in their community and their safe community, to respect that and hear them out and ask for context. Because the context, I think, is going to be the hardest online to actually be able to see. But that's like an age-old story. I'm sure, Rita, you remember like how many times we always do the DV 101 scenarios and stuff where domestic violence 101, when we're telling people, like somebody receives flowers or there comes outside and there's a coffee sitting on their car. This is a very common scenario where people have been minimized, their family, their friends, their neighbors saying like, oh, I wish somebody brought me a coffee. Right. It's that same scenario, but online, where like, oh, I wish my boyfriend would check in on me and wonder where I was. He doesn't even seem to care. It's very similar scenarios. So we really have to think, like, when somebody feels like somebody's being overbearing, somebody's being controlling, trust that instinct and say, well, if it doesn't feel good, then let's talk about it. Yeah. But we minimize it too often.
Excellent. I'm going to try something not done before. Megan Dubovsky's had her hand up for quite some time. I'm going to click on allow to talk. Megan, are you there? Megan?
She's muted.
You're muted, Megan. We'll give you a couple of more moments. No, okay. I think we'll move on. So one thing we haven't even mentioned, by the way, is we've just come out of the pandemic. Well, no, we haven't. Sorry, we're still in it. Well, maybe we're coming out of it and it's turning into an endemic. But how has the last 2 years impacted your respective jobs, missions, attitudes about all of this? Are you feeling better? Are you feeling worse? Are you feeling more confused? Ryan, let me start with you. How has that pandemic impacted your work?
Well, I work from home now, and that's new and has been new for the last 2 years. It's been really interesting for us. A lot of our knowledge workers, like we all were able to transition to working from home and have moved to sort of a hybrid work style now, where we'll probably be working from home and then heading to offices temporarily. From a product perspective, what's been really interesting is obviously we've just put millions of people online more frequently in more scenarios, whether they're doing homeschooling or how those whatever the sort of capabilities have been for their environment. So we've looked at things like, how do you help optimize for a family where on a limited internet connection they're doing Zoom calls for school and home, and then they've got a younger one who maybe is trying to stream Netflix. These are new challenges that didn't exist prior to having the whole family at home. It's also introduced again, a big focus for us is moving into the space of parental controls, but also making the parental controls and making the tools that we offer to consumers just easier. I say this to my family all the time. This is what I do half the day. I'm on Zoom calls probably 8 or 9 hours a day now. The last thing I want to do is go home and then do like a family Zoom call and talk to other folks. How do we optimize, and this actually leads into some of the stuff that Dr. Greenfield has talked about, how do we optimize the time we spend online to make these, this sort of psychological baggage we carry? How do I keep my kids safe? How do I keep myself safe? How do I protect my data? How do we make that not a persistent threat in your brain, but instead just something that is taken care of for you? And for us, we're just doubling down on simplicity and making it easier and simpler for everyone, because we all have enough stuff to do during the day online. The last thing we need to do is worry about all the other bits and pieces and how they leak out.
I hear you.
Simple is better.
Good.
But I think, Stephen, you asked a little bit about how things have changed, correct? Yeah. And so over the last 2 years, people have been forced to isolate together more. And one of the things that's important for people to understand is that domestic violence is a crime of access. So the more often they're together, the more likely the abuse can happen. And particularly the first year and a half of this pandemic, there was a lot of forced isolation where victims couldn't figure out how to safely reach out because they were in the same room or the same facility with their abuser. And so domestic violence programs did a great pivot, a great flex, and they started learning more about chatting. And so they were able to quietly connect with services if they could figure that part out. Calling the hotline was less likely because they might be heard. And so, adding in the chats. But I think that I don't know how we're going to transition back to what will be whatever normal is, because I think it's going to change. I don't think it's going to be the same after this, which means that it might be that people are more accessible to be victimized at this point. And so we need to figure out in this field that Erica and I are in about how it is we help people understand how to protect themselves in that space when they don't have the 8 hours a day where they can get away and take care of themselves and reach out to resources and plan without all the harassment and crisis and drama, so they can think a little more clearly. So I think that we're going to have to flex even better and figure out some other strategies. But certainly this last 2 years has I think increased the possibility for more frequent abuse and maybe even more serious abuse happening because they were just always together.
So distressing. Listen, I do want to make sure we get in a question from the audience. Ashley Rumschlag has sent in a question. How do you suggest having a conversation with teens about sending explicit photos to a dating partner?
Yeah, that's $1 million question.
We have all the time in the world, David. Go ahead.
But what's interesting is first you have to define what is an explicit photo, because what I found among teens and even tweens and middle school kids is that their definition of what an explicit photo is may be different than yours. So they have all these rules that, unbeknownst to me, about what's okay to show and what's not, and how much and under what circumstance. And if you're dating somebody or you're about to date somebody, you can show them this. But if you're, really involved with them, you can show them that. I think the first thing, of course, is to let them know that when you send a photo, there is no guarantee, of course, that the only person that's going to see it is the person that you're intending to have it seen by. And in fact, there's data to show that in over half the cases where photos are sent, more than the recipient gets to see them. So in other words, there is no such thing as a private photo being sent, even though you're sending it from one person to another, because of the nature of the way stuff is shared online and posted. And then also, even with apps like Snapchat that supposedly disappear, people can take screenshots, they save the photo, even though you think it's gone, and they can actually reproduce that photo later. There's all sorts of tricks about keeping things that are supposed to be impermanent. There really is no such thing as impermanent when it comes to the internet. And that's something, that heavy Snapchat users aren't aware of. And of course, Snapchat is a very common platform that's being used. And, to educate people as to the fact that they may not want people to see certain things, even though right now it may not seem like a big deal. It may be a big deal to them later. I'm sure other people have comments about this. This is a big issue in terms of sending photos.
Well, I want to add another layer because we've had another question from our good friend Joe Laramie. How do you teach consent as it relates to sharing explicit photos with others?
Well, and how do you give consent if you're under 18? I mean, technically, you don't really have the ability to do that. So it gets very complicated. We have all sorts of situations where a 15-year-old is sending a photo to a 16-and-a-half-year-old. And I can tell you, I see the legal cases that come up because of this. It gets very complicated.
Right.
I think, Stephen, you had asked about how things have changed over the pandemic, and this is definitely something that we've seen an increase in. The non-consensual distribution of intimate images is definitely, and a number of needs assessment and surveys has skyrocketed. And I do think that it speaks to how much not just young people, because it's not only young adults who are sending images by any means. It's actually a very highly rated issue in retirement communities. So I often like to remember that before we try to judge young people too much. It's important to have that frame of reference and know that it's not only their teens who are doing this. But I do think that if for teens and younger adults who don't live with their partner, who don't live with their romantic person in their life, over the pandemic, they've really had to lean into online spaces and technology in order to continue those relationships. So I think we've seen an increase in online harassment, online abuse, and image sharing. We think it's incredibly important to focus on the distribution and to recognize that. Anyone who's doing this work and who's on the intervention and prevention kind of side of abuse and concerns around privacy and safety, we're hearing the bad cases. Nobody's talking to us. Nobody's coming to us reporting when they've shared images with somebody and those images have stayed within the the trust and boundaries of that healthy relationship.
Right.
Nobody's telling us about that. We
Right.
are hearing about the bad ones. And when we're hearing about it, it is because somebody has violated someone else's privacy, someone else's trust, and they've distributed the photos. It is that is the issue. And that is the piece that we really need to focus on. I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where people aren't sharing images. And something that was incredibly eye-opening for me several years ago, MTV did a campaign called a Thin Line many years ago, where they interviewed teenagers and younger adults to talk to them about images and sharing images specifically. And it was so fascinating how many people started answering questions to say, well, last time I didn't respond and I never shared a photo, I got beat up. I was told that they were going to share this rumor across the entire school with me if I didn't share a photo. So first of all, there's a lot of photo sharing that is actual coercion. People are doing it out of fear. They're doing it out of trying to save themselves from some sort of abuse, and understanding that context is really important. So we actually have to get to that context. So even if you find out that your teen has shared a photo, maybe they did it because they were interested, but maybe not. The other thing that they found out from there was that so many young people were saying, you know, we've grown up in this world where everybody is telling us to be careful. Every campaign out there is saying, you know, that it's the acquaintance. It's the guy, you know, the person I'm going on the first date with who's a potential rapist, who's a potential danger to me. And so they are actually trying to use platforms and spaces and devices to explore their sexuality, to explore relationships in a different way that actually in that moment feels safer, because they're not in person. So they're not at risk of an in-person assault. And that, hearing that perspective, that people were actually making that calculated choice because in that moment it felt safer, was so eye-opening to me as an advocate, because I really thought, like, I need to understand this more. I need to think about it. And again, it's kind of one of those where we have to meet people where they are and think about that, because that's not a terrible strategy. So I have seen some organizations that have tried to give out some tips and thoughts about what kind of platforms you use, how you take photos so that you can, so it's not identifying, that it really is the issue that is named is not necessarily about the sharing. Although everyone has opinions about that and to each their own, right? But the issue is really about that distribution. And if somebody violated your trust, if they did that, you know, how do you prevent them from sharing something that's identifying? How do you respond if they do end up sharing something? And really, I think there's so much in the terms of like shaping that norm about what you do when somebody shares something with you.
Yeah, sorry to jump in. We only have a few minutes left. I want to make sure we have getting some requests now. Susan Kennedy, can you share the research where the stat that 50% of those explicit images are seen by someone other than the person it was intended for? David, I think that was you. I don't know if you have any research you can share.
Could you, you cut out, one of the words cut out. Could you repeat the question?
Can you share the research where the stat that 50% of those explicit images are seen by someone other than the person it was intended for?
Yeah, I'd have to look up the reference. I don't have it off the top.
Okay, send that to us and we'll include it in a mailer. Daniela Santabanes, do you have any info research articles on techno addictions, how to detect addictive patterns, and what to do as families? Again, David, as we're short of time, send that to us and we'll circulate that. In these final moments that we have together, I would like us now to just pivot a little bit and think about the future. And the future is already with us. If you watch the Super Bowl, you could see an awful lot of crypto ads. You saw a lot of, I don't know, some quite far out there ones. And the most obvious, unless you've been living under a rock the last few months, is this idea of the metaverse. A very immersive, I think of it as going from 2D, like we are on right now, to 3D, where you're actually placed inside it. Do you guys, in relatively brief responses, do you feel sanguine? Do you feel good about where we're heading? Do you feel not so good about it? Is the jury out? When you think of the metaverse and this particular topic, what comes to mind?
Well, I will have to say, Stephen, that I totally don't get the concept. So maybe it's holograms, maybe it's that kind of a sense of, like virtual reality inside something. What I'm always concerned about is every time we do technology upgrades, we increase the potential for abusers to find ways to control the other person. And creating these technologies is great and helpful in many, many ways, but there's a huge downside. And I want companies who are doing these kinds of innovations to think critically about the services that they're offering and what the potential consequences that are negative could be, and doing everything they can to subvert that first. Just being great and innovative and creative is not, I think, the only goal we have here.
I'll jump in. I think the jury is out. Rita hit on a lot of points, which is basically anytime we have a new technological advance, the pace of technology advancement outpaces societal's ability to keep up, with like the sort of rules and sort of best practices on how you behave there, and significantly outpaces legislation, regulation, which are still trying to keep up with technology from 20 years ago, let alone technology is going to be growing over the next 20 years. There's always that early small window where new technology is utopian and everybody is super happy because it's a very curated small group. And in the moment, you broaden the doors, you bring in lots of really great new things, but a whole host of folks who just want to cause grief for everyone else. At least we've learned, hopefully, from the previous couple of generations of technology to know that these problems will come, but we're already seeing them in the metaverse, and hopefully we'll adapt faster than we have previously in previous generation technology. But I think, as always, the jury will be out until you see meaningful change, which we've been a little lagging on the technology side.
Anyone else? David, you happy about the metaverse?
No, I'm not happy about it, but unfortunately it probably won't be perfected during my lifetime. I don't get it. I don't get why we would want to give up real-time living to live in some virtual reality. I think that there's ample data to show that joy in the real world or real-time living is infinitely better. And all the data that I have shows that when people spend less time online, they're actually happier. So I think that's going in the wrong direction, and I'm hoping it's going to fail, frankly. And that's where I'm putting my bets.
Well, I've just got my Oculus Quest headset, so I'm hoping it's not going to fail right away. Okay, I want to get a couple of years use out of it first.
Okay.
Erica, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's still a lot to be determined and to know. I've read that, some interesting suggestions on the opportunities for education. I think that everything in technology and virtual platforms, they mirror the real life, and so we have to be incredibly careful, because while there will be wonderful, innovative ideas for use that benefit, that increase access, that might address the digital divide in some way, that really could be helpful to some students, for example, there will be people who misuse and are abusive in any space that is created. And we have to be really careful and very thoughtful as we proceed.
And I would just say the onus is very much on the companies building this, or in some cases already have built it out. If you talk to some companies like Roblox and others, there is already a virtual world where kids and others are already interacting with avatars and so on. So the onus is very, very much on those companies to get safety right by design at the very beginning. But we will have to keep pressure on. We will have to keep them honest, if you will. All right. Well, this would be the point in which I would ask the audience to give a round of applause, but we'll do that virtually. Thank you all so very, very much for your time, your fascinating insights, which I can't wait to rewatch this when we put it up on our YouTube channel. Want to thank you, Ryan, and your colleague Hillary for Aura's support of this. Really appreciate that. Very much appreciate your thoughtful approach to this topic and to engaging us to talk about this topic in particular. A big thank you to all of you who have tuned in and sent us your comments, your questions. We will try and get back as much as we possibly can in terms of the materials and the links that you all have been asking for. Last but not least, I just want to let you know our next webinar will be held on Tuesday, March the 1st, and it's entitled A Transatlantic Youth Dialogue on the Future of Digital Safety. So we're going to go from us old dogs and old cats, as we were talking about, Rita, and actually listen to some new dogs and new cats.
Yay.
Yeah. These are 4 remarkable teenagers, 2 from Europe, 2 from the US, about the many of the issues, obviously, we've talked about today. And I'm going to be co-moderating with the cyberbullying expert, Samir Handunja, who has been working with these kids as part of Microsoft's Council for Digital Good. So please tune into that. It's going to be a fascinating conversation, and we will hear it from the source, as it were. So again, thank you all so much. Thank you, our wonderful panelists. I hope to see you all soon. Take care.
Thanks.
Stay
Thank you
safe.
so much.